Hello everyone, welcome back to the Digital Adoption Show. I'm your host Neha Smriti, Growth Marketing Manager here at WhatPex. And today we are exploring a whole new level in the world of learning. Yes, think of it like a level up in your favorite game. Before we start our discussion, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, let's talk about today's episode because this one is a game changer. And literally, we are diving into gamifying learning for real world impact. How do we actually make learning addictive, engaging, and something people actually want to come back to? To help us crack it, we have Karl Kapp. Karl is a full professor at Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania and has spent over 2 decades designing learning experiences that feel less like boring lectures and more like epic quests. He's a practitioner, author, speaker, and the mastermind behind the L&D Mentor Academy. His latest book, Action First Learning, is launching soon, and trust me, you will want this one on your bookshelf. Carl, it's fantastic to have you on the show. How are you doing
Yeah,
today?
thanks. I'm doing fantastic, and it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming to the show. Okay, before we start the main discussion, we usually have this quick fun round of this or that. It's nothing but we give you two options, and then you have to choose the best that fits your personality. So, are you ready
Okay,
for?
I'll give it a try. Yeah.
Okay, you'll have to put your thinking cap on for this
Okay.
questions because they are not going to be easy. But the first one will be quite easy for you. So, if you had to choose between learning through board games or escape rooms, which one would it be?
Oh my goodness, it's very difficult, but I think through escape rooms. I think they're a lot of fun and they're collaborative.
Yeah, and it's more experiential. You're actually going around doing stuff.
It is. It's a tough choice. You can learn a lot from board games as well. Slight advantage to escape room.
Perfect. Okay, having a pause button for life or a rewind button?
I think I'll go for the button.
Pause button, is it?
Yeah, the pause button. I think that would be great. Give me more time to think and process before I speak.
I would have gone with the rewind button because big time sucker for nostalgia. So why not just go back in time, relive the whole moment and everything?
True, but yeah, that's a good point. My thought is maybe you could avoid some of the mistakes I make with a pause instead of having to go back and fix. But probably in reality, there's a lot more fixing that would need to be done.
Okay, now this one is gonna be a tricky one. So living one life for 100 years or 10 different lives for 10 years each. I'll give you
Uh,
the I'll also add on, you will start living maybe after 20s. So it's not like you're
okay,
living till age.
okay, so can I hit the pause button on this? I think actually, to me, it would be very interesting to live 10 different lives. So you could try a lot of different things, do a lot of different things, see if something works or doesn't work. So I think that might be interesting rather than 100-year life.
Same, I think that will be fun to have 10 different lives. Like just test each of them and see which one is the best.
Exactly.
Okay, the second last one is unlimited creativity or a perfect memory.
Oh, good question. I think in that case, I would like to have unlimited creativity. That way I could dream of like really amazing things, share that with other people, and just continue to add to culture and society and the world by being really creative.
True. Nowadays, with all the tools that are available, you don't really need to remember everything. So I think having a lot of creativity is actually pretty good. Okay, the final one is always finding lost items or never getting stuck in traffic. But
I
the
do not like traffic. I'm fairly rural, so there's not a lot of traffic. But when I go places, I always seem to get stuck in traffic. But never losing something is interesting as well because I'm always misplacing things. But I think for expedience purpose, never getting stuck in traffic would be pretty nice.
yeah, even the city I come from, we are infamous for worst traffic in the country. So anybody, if I have given that this choice in my city, they would have gone hands on just the second option, not getting stuck in traffic. Perfect. This was fun discussion, Carl. So
Yes.
let's start with our actual discussion. So when we were having our chat, you talked about your journey in gamification and instructional design. And you said it started pretty uniquely with a sixth grade safety video. I would just want you to walk us through how your early experiences actually shaped your passion for innovative learning design.
So when I was in sixth grade, I had a crush on this girl, and she went into little theater, so acting, and so I decided to go into little theater. And it literally changed my life, but not how I thought. One of the things that we had did in that little theater, a local instructional design company came and said, "Hey, we need kids to be taught how to cross the street. And the mascot was a whistle. His name was Willie Whistle. Mm-hmm. So Willie Whistle would whistle at us if we crossed the street improperly and we were acting and going through that process. And fast forward then maybe 15 years into the future, and I was graduating from college with a teaching degree, almost a minor in psychology, major in English, and I was looking for a job. And this company, Applied Science Associates, where I did the Willie Whistle video, had an opportunity for someone to do this thing called instructional design, which I had no idea what that was, no idea. But I had actually enrolled in college to become a counselor, college counselor. And I got to Applied Science and they gave me some tasks and everything. I'm like, wow, this is like the neatest thing ever. It's such a great combination of psychology and teaching, writing. This is fantastic. What is this? They're like, this is called instructional technology. And the neat thing about that was it's right when computers were coming online for business, right when basically desktop computers. And so the technology there was really the methodology or the approach. And I thought, oh, what a great way of thinking about teaching people, having this methodological approach, this technology applied to learning. And I'm like, count me in. So I went back to the university, changed my major, which was a huge undertaking. Didn't realize it would be as hard as it was. And then worked for this company for a number of years, designing, developing, and learning about the creation of instruction. Meanwhile, getting my master's in instructional design and technology, and then eventually getting my doctorate degree. But it literally, I had no idea that this training outside of the classroom even existed. And I had no idea how important it was to be systematic in the development of it. And I've since learned that in a lot of educational environments, you don't get taught that systematic approach to designing instruction. I've really benefited from it. And then my mission ever since has been really to help other people learn how to design, develop, and deliver a really impactful instruction. And I've had a great time doing it at the college level, in consulting and workshops and conferences and all that kind of stuff. So it literally changed my life, that having that crush on that girl in sixth grade. Now, to this day, we still don't talk to each other, but it was a life-changing event for me. I'm not sure she knew I had a crush on her. I'm not sure she knew I existed.
And it's always like once you are like at a cusp of transformation, you might find a lot of hidden opportunities which were not available earlier. So you were at the right time at the right place. That came true. Your love took you places. Do you think you had an early experience in like theatrical experience? Do you think that experience has come through even the way you develop instructional design frameworks or learnings?
What a great question. So people always ask me, were you a good actor? And I'm like, do you see me on TV? And they're like, no. And I said, so there you go. But I do think that I would recommend anyone who goes into any kind of public speaking to do a theater background. So it's taught me improv. It's taught me how to speak in front of people. It's taught me the value of drama and a little bit of mystery. And so it really, I think, has come through in a lot of what I do. And it's so funny because we would memorize these massive amounts of scripts and what people had to say and things. And it's interesting because that also comes through when you teach, right? You need to have content. You don't have to memorize it, but you have to have content at your fingertips. You have to be able to speak right away. And so sometimes I forget about, like, I have a webinar or I have something. And a couple times I've gotten better, but a couple times somebody says, Karl, you have a webinar in 15 minutes. Aren't you ready? And I'll throw together some slides and then give the webinar. My wife's like, how do you even do that? I couldn't even. I said, but my improv background in theater and my ability to play off of people because of that theater training. We had a woman named Miss Cahill who was a great teacher, and she really helped us master the basics of theatrics. And then people I know who go into theater do a really great job in other areas of their lives as well, just because of the lessons that it teaches.
And like you said, I think even I should take theatrical experience because I'm making podcasts, but I feel this actually is a talent that would come handy. So it's something which a lot of people should do who are into public speaking, like you said. So this will be a great addition to the portfolio of things that you're doing. Okay, coming to the next question, you have often highlighted the importance of blending engagement with impact in corporate learning. Do you have any real life example where gamification in general improved a company learning outcomes? You would have implemented these kind of initiatives in a lot of companies. So do you have any real life example if you could share that with our audience?
Yeah, so several examples I think are critical. One, actually, I highlight in no, this way in Action First Learning is it was really interesting. This consultancy firm was trying to train their consultants how to work together and how to be on a team. And they decided to create an escape room. And this was fascinating because they created it like an airport because consultants are always in the airport. And then they gave them the situation where they had to help planes land. The first day they had to try to get out of the airport. They couldn't do it. Then they had to help planes land, and you eventually went into the control room and all that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing there was afterwards they did some surveys on teamwork and bonding and found out that cohort of consultants they were retained longer because consultancy has a high level of burnout. They were more efficient on their projects, and they actually rated the company culture higher than before. So that's a way of onboarding those people into the organization, and it was really a lot of fun. Another thing, gamification experience I had was we were doing some training for a company that did a lot of government work, and they always were doing audits and investigations of potential fraud. And they brought me in because they were still not doing these evaluations correctly, and they weren't getting the right results, and it wasn't working out. And so I looked at the instruction. It was classical, traditional instructional design. Here's the learning objectives, here's the forms, here's the website, here's maybe a role play at the end. And so we flipped that. We started out, people walked into the room, and we said to them, hey, a colleague has just come to you and accused your boss of embezzling $10,000. What do you do? Yeah. And for the first few minutes, it was this classroom. A couple of the students were like, what do we do? And then they just sat there and no help was given. And then all of a sudden one said, hey, why don't we check the corporate website? And boom, they went to the website and they said, oh, we need to talk to this person. And we had some actors, and the actor came in and talked to them. And at the end, they had actually conducted a full investigation. Mm-hmm. So that was another example of gamification really having a solid impact. Another example, we did a board game, which was really fascinating. This company was taking managers who were working at the operations level, and they were moving up to the enterprise level. So they were used to being in silos, and they wanted to get them to think across the organization rather than just sub-optimizing their thinking. And so we created this board game. It unfolded over 3 days. And the first day, there were a team of 9. But that 9 was broken into teams of 3. So each board had 9 people, and there were 3 different elements: sales, operations, and human resources. And we set up the challenges for them that if they decided to work together, they would be successful. But if they had the mindset that, okay, we're going to optimize operations and we're not going to really care about HR that much, production went down. And so the first day, of course, everybody's production was horrible. So we did a little bit of talking about that. And then the second day it was much better. And then the third day, when we gave them the optimization techniques, it was 100% turnaround from day one. Yeah. So that was another example of using a gamified method to do that. I've done gamified card games. I could go on, but lots of ways that you can add that engagement and that game element into the instruction to have a meaningful long-term impact.
I think it's more to do with once people actually engage, it's like learning while doing it. So usually we use it for maybe just learning on the job itself, but this is more to do with you will remember the experiences you had while playing that game or just reenacting that whole situation which might happen. So people might remember, understand the objective, like you had example on getting all people onboarded or even just telling them about the role they were getting into. So it's more to do with the experience that you're giving, which might not be as efficient when you give them a 500 pager of instruction. This is how you have to do your job. And everybody's like, okay, throw it away.
And nobody reads that, and nobody understands. It was interesting because with the board game, months later, people were referring, hey, remember when in the board game, operations did this and sales did it? Maybe we should fix this. And so it was really gratifying to see those changes where, to your point, you give somebody a 500-page document, and chances of them reading it and then remembering it are pretty slim. We mistake often quantity of instruction, quantity of content for quality.
Yeah.
And we assume that is what works, but it's absolutely, we know, doesn't work.
True. And if you had to, because these are very distinct kind of example for different use cases, but if you had to measure after each of these projects, how do you actually measure for these successes? You would have some vanity metrics as how many people attended it, how many people could remember it after. But once you get out of this game, you get into real world and just start doing it. How do we measure it on a long-term basis that the impact of that particular game that we did on the first day of the job has had this type of impact on the role itself? Do you have some other metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, before you ever do the game or experience, you have to decide what behavior you're trying to change. What output do you want? So, you need to measure that before you do the intervention. So, you have to figure out, what are we trying to actually do? Are we trying to increase sales? Are we trying to get a better cooperation? Are we trying to influence? So, you measure. Now, many people believe you can measure everything. I don't think you can, but let's pretend we can measure an awful lot. So we measure that behavior, then we do the intervention, and then afterwards we monitor or track that behavior. So if there's a change in the behavior for the positive, we can say, hey, the game we think influenced that behavior, the experience influenced that behavior. If it's for the negative, then you have to figure out, why is that? Is it related? How does that happen? And you track that over time. But the important thing is, and I think a lot of people forget this, is to measure the define, but then measure the behavior before you do the intervention. If you wait until after you, oh, okay, let's measure. What are you measuring again? Like, how do you know what it was before? So you really have to think through the whole learning experience. And the other thing I would say is to think through from the business perspective. What does the business want out of this training? Does the business want increased sales? Do they want, a business, for example, doesn't want increased product knowledge. They don't care about that. They care about, what does that lead to? What does that lead to? Sales? Does that lead to better customer support? Does it lead to less calls? Does it lead to better technical specification of the product? So you really need to think through what you want, and then that's how you figure out how you're going to measure it.
Amazing. I think it's pretty straightforward too. You have to understand where you are at in the beginning and then you compare it with where you actually reached. So it's pretty straightforward, but people miss out on that small nuances every now and then.
Yeah, it's tough. You get caught up in developing instruction and trying to meet the needs of the organization. And
Yeah.
but we have to be more than just order takers. We have to be internal, sometimes people use the term performance consultants, right? We have to dig down and say, okay, why do you want this training? Okay, then what measurements exist? Ideally, it would be measurements that already exist that the business is using to measure themselves, and then work toward those measurements. And that is, I think, where we can have a big impact.
True. So true. Okay, now let's talk about your new book, Action First Learning. So I just wanted to discuss the core idea behind this book. So would want to know what is in that book for our listeners, anybody who wants to read it, what are the things they can just take back after reading that book?
Yeah, fantastic. So one of the things that throughout my career that I've noticed a lot of times in instruction is we like to tell the learner stuff before we ever have them do something, or maybe we never have them do something. Here's the objectives that you're going to learn. Here's this that you're going to learn. Here's that you're going to learn. And to me, it sometimes sets the tone for the learner being a passive vessel. And that gives the opportunity to daydream, to click next as fast as you can through e-learning modules, and not really to be present for the learning. And I found in my experiences, and go back to the research, experience first and then went and looked at the research, was that when somebody is active right away, that sets the tone for the entire learning experience. They expect them to be active. If you're passive right away, you expect for your whole learning experience to be passive. So when the instructor or the e-learning module asks you to do something, you're like, yeah. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, right? So an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So to borrow some physics analogies, so it hit me that we've got to get learners doing something right away, maybe making a critical decision, maybe being dealt a card, having to escape a room, putting a piece on a board game, looking through augmented reality, phone or glasses. Like, we've got to get the learners working. So did a lot of work on gamification and helping learners understand game elements and how they can add to the instruction. But sometimes those got misinterpreted that, hey, you answer a question, you get 10 points. That's a passive activity, right? I want them to think and then answer the question. I want them to do an action and experience the consequence, and then you get it. There's an educational researcher named Malcolm Knowles who once wrote that adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something. So action-based learning or action-first learning, really, the idea is I'm going to put you in a situation where I'm going to show you don't know something. Because adult learners come into a lot of learning situations, go, I already know, this is a waste of my time. So if I can show them that they don't know something, then they're more open to learning. And that's the premise behind action-first learning. It's we want you to do something, we want you to take an action, and then we want you to think and reflect on that action, and then the learning's going to occur. The other thing I want to say real quick is it's not action for action's sake, right? If we make a learner do something and then we don't reflect on that, we don't debrief it, it doesn't mean anything, it's just an icebreaker, then the learning's not really going to occur. But if we put them like in a board game situation where you have got to make a critical decision about sub-optimization, if we make you make a decision about an embezzlement, what do you do? If you have to make a decision in those areas, then you're really thinking it through in an environment that's safe and where you can make mistakes, and then you can learn from those mistakes. And that's the whole process behind action first learning.
That's actually pretty nice because in my experience, I remember you are solving for problems like when we join any new company, we have to do these 3 to 4 compliance courses. They are pretty boring, but you have to get through it. And they just force you not, you can't press the next button. You have to go through that 30-40 second of video. And I think this would have solved so much people who would have actually engaged in. And I loved your analogy of how comparing the concept of inertia to people just, that's how people learn. And even bringing in the knack of curiosity that once people know that, okay, I might not be aware about this thing, so let me learn it. Otherwise, people have a tendency that, okay, I know this, why should I read it again? So I love how you have played around on different people behavior and then brought it in a book which will be very useful. And I remember when we were last talking, you had spoken like people could just read one chapter and get, it's not a continuation of the previous one. So even if you're not reading through the book, but you can just go to one chapter based on your own interest and just read through it, you'll get something out of it. So why don't you talk?
Exactly. Yeah. So I would recommend people jump to the last chapter because the last chapter says, okay, here's all the different kind of action first designs that are in the book. And there are more designs than in the book. I had to stop writing at some point. So there's all of these action first, and then what do you want to accomplish? So one of the things that I do in every chapter is break down like what type of learning works best with this type of action first approach. And then what kind of mechanics should you use? And then step-by-step instructions on how to do that. So if you wanted to do an escape room, you go to the escape room chapter. It says this is what escape rooms work best for. And you can say, yeah, it fits my, or no, it doesn't. Let me go to something else. Oh, maybe card games work better, or maybe a board game works better, or maybe virtual reality works better. And so it goes through each chapter as it's self-contained. Now, the first chapter is on the whole idea of action first learning, the framework and the model. And the reason why that's there is because I really want people to understand that it's not just these elements in this book. It means taking action first. It's a philosophy. You can adapt this to whatever you want to do. So you can go ahead and do that. But if you need the tools and you need a quick, like, how do I do this? Each chapter is laid out really interesting, because all my other books were like more linear. And so to me, this was a challenge and an interesting book to write. But every book starts out with an action first action to take. Hey, for the card game chapter, you have to grab a deck of cards and you have to shuffle and you have to do a bunch of things. And then it starts with a little story showing how this works. And then it talks about when you would want to do this, why you'd want to do this, and then what mechanics, and then what it's good for, and then a case study in real life, and then an AI assisted prompt. So you're like, hey, how can I use AI to help me build an escape room? Boom, there's a prompt right in there that's going to help you. So the whole book is designed for a practitioner to just pick it up and go, hey, I've got training in 2 weeks. I want to do something that's engaging. What can I do? And you can go through the book, find out what to do, and then step by step, it's going to tell you what you need to do. It's going to give you an example. And this book, interestingly, builds on, I think this is like my 9th or 10th book. And every book, like I write it and I'm really proud of it. I put it out there, then you get the feedback. Like you get the critics, like, oh, this is a great book, but there was no case study. Oh, okay, so I'm gonna put a case study. And then they're like, oh, this is a great case study, but there's no step-by-step instruction. Oh, okay. There was no thing to tell me when to use this. Oh, okay. All my lessons from those chapters, from those books before and chapter are in each chapter to help make, I think, a pretty comprehensive book. Now I know that somebody will go, oh, you forgot to add whatever. But this was my latest best attempt to get all of what I know about helping people leverage content in a book to actually creating instruction.
Actually, that's pretty nice. And like you said, so this book is gonna be coming together of 10 other books that you have written. So I think our audience should definitely buy this book for that reason.
The other fun thing about the book is my colleague Kevin Thorne. So action first learning means that taking action first, but I also am playing off the concept of action comics, which came out like in the 1940s as the very first one is Superman on the cover lifting a car. And Kevin did graphics for all of the chapters, cartoon graphic, and the publisher's talking about issuing a coloring book. So an adult coloring book to help people focus, and it's a good distraction based on the comics in the book. So I'm super excited about that as well.
Yeah, even I'm excited. I am just waiting for it to launch and then I will buy my hand.
April 15th, yes.
Yeah, thanks for sharing the date. Okay, my next question to you, Carl, is we have always talked about gamification and micro learning, and they are like the buzzword that we often see people misunderstanding, or they are always misapplied in certain areas. Do you think there are common pitfalls companies normally fall into when adopting these two strategies of gamification or micro learning? You might just go ahead with talking about gamification itself.
So I think one common problem with gamification is they equate gamification with points, badges, and leaderboards. And while those are elements of gamification, that's probably the least impactful form of gamification. I coined another term called content gamification, which is when you take content and make it more game-like. And I think that's a more meaningful area. But if you look at some of the mistakes they'll make, so for example, another mistake that a lot of companies will make is they'll gamify the outcome and not the behaviors. So what I mean by that is outcome might be more sales. So they might say whoever sells the most is going to get a prize or the most points or whatever. Problem is the people that already know how to sell the most are going to sell the most. And the people that don't know how to sell the most don't know how to get there. So you haven't really helped anything except the high performers get yet another reward, which is selling more. So what we should do instead is say, what do the top performers do that nobody else is doing that helps them sell the most? And so let's just pick something and say, maybe they do more cold calls than any other of the lower performers. Then gamify making cold calls. Don't gamify more sales. Why? Because the people that are underperforming will learn the value of cold calls and understand that cold calls are important, and that will move up your overall sales, not just rewarding the best salespeople. So that's an important element to think about. Reward the behaviors, not the outcome. So that's really important. So don't get too caught up in points, badges, and leaderboards. If you're going to do a leaderboard, for example, change it weekly or monthly, because the person at the top of the leaderboard loves it, the person at the bottom of the leaderboard hates it. And if you're like, oh, I'm never going to get to the top of the leaderboard, you drop out, right? So you got to make this thing living, and you've got to make it tied to behaviors, and you got to make it impactful for the employee. So those are some mistakes to avoid and some ways that you can avoid those mistakes.
So if you just have to put it in crux, it would be like gamify the processes, gamify the behavior, and not just gamify the outcome. Because the example you gave of points, badges, and rewards that we have seen in real life as well. We have seen in the name of gamification, you will just see, okay, here's this board, and whoever performs better will go up the leaderboard, and that's not going to motivate somebody because they'll do the same old thing which they were doing yesterday to get the same result. So the leaderboard is not going to change in any way. But that's a pretty nice and safe example. Thanks, Carl. So the next question I have for you is, even at WhatFix, my company I work for, we are all about helping users adopt and engage with digital tools or any kind of application. From your perspective, how can gamification techniques actually boost user adoption of digital platforms? So, any application, how can gamification as a concept improve that adoption?
Yeah, so again, look at what behaviors you want in terms of the adoption. If you want to reward people for using the app, that's one way to gamify. Another way to do that is to think about what actions you want outside of the app. What do you want them to do because they're using the app, right? They're using the app for a goal or a behavior or a purpose. So what is that? So one of the things that is underutilized, I think, is the use of badges in gamification. So badging really is a sign of accomplishment. It should be a sign of accomplishment, meaning that if you earn a badge, it should be meaningful that you've earned it. Mm-hmm. And you then need to be able to display it, but it also, I think another thing that companies miss is that it can't just be in the software. You have to, when you have an all hands meeting, you have to recognize people that have earned a badge, and you have to describe to them or is it like, why is that important? And then you can create stackable badges. So if you get 3 badges, maybe you get certified in using the software. And one of the things that we've done with software and gamification is we've created kind of a master badge. And so it's an accumulation of a lot of different badges. But what happens is people really do enjoy helping other people. And so we equip them to help their coworkers. So there's always a coworker who wants to help other coworkers, and there's always a coworker that is relying on the others. And when you make that official through the badging and the gamified way through the content, then they have a sense of pride and accomplishment when they help others. Mm-hmm. And then you can reward them for helping others. So not just reward them for, knowing the software, doing the right thing, but now you're rewarding people for helping others learn to use the software. And now you're making the conversation around learning to use software. You're rewarding people around learning to use software. So it adds tremendous value to helping people understand and gain that. And then the other thing that I mentioned before is maybe if you have a leaderboard that's in place, you have leaderboards for this week. We're going to focus on doing this process with the software. We're going to reward people who understand and know how to do that. Next week, we're going to reward people who know how to do this. You'll have people that want to compete on every level, and so they'll work to do that all the way through. But again, you have to make it meaningful. For example, when you assign points, which eventually get a leaderboard, for example, let's say you have 10 points. You need to have those points have value. So if you got a 10, you did it perfectly. If you got like a 3, you have work to do. So in that case, having the gamified system give you feedback on how well you're doing, how well you're progressing, be a great way to bring that, to make that gamification real. It all boils down to, so I talked about people over rely on points, badges, and leaderboards. It doesn't mean they're bad. It means they need to be implemented correctly. And unfortunately, what a lot of organizations do is they implement it haphazardly, and they're not deliberate about how they're entering the reward. So those are some ways that you can help to make the software training more effective. The other thing is, do scenario based, right? You're usually doing software to solve a client problem or organizational problem, and there's a scenario behind that. Mm-hmm. And so rather than, a lot of software training is, see this field, you can put this value or this value. See this field, you can put this value or this value. So it's better to say, look, here's a scenario where the customer is asking for this and this, complete the software. And now they have the context or the story behind how the software is used. So if we move to content gamification, we can see that it's providing the context and content of why you would want to do this in a story type of situation, and that can help solidify the learning.
Okay, I want to double down here. If we have to give an example, just to, before I ask you a question, do you have an awareness of what digital adoption platforms usually are? So we work in a category of digital adoption platform. These are basically in any kind of application, be it enterprise level application, because they are very complicated. They have a lot of things that user might be using it for at different use cases. To just simplify it, we have a sort of overlayer on the top of application themselves, which we call digital adoption platform, which could be click here, you can do this, then next, or just giving you a to-do list of, if you complete these steps, this is how you can use this application. Basically, easing the adoption in it. Do you see any kind of relevance gamification can have on these if we incorporate both the DApp platform and gamification as a concept together? Would it improve adoption more? Or do you think they might clash at some point? What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're already providing some instructional elements as you use it, if you would reward the learner and recognize them for doing that, and then give them these very visible pathways. You're using the enterprise software for lots of different complicated things, but I'm probably using it for these 5, 6 things, right? So certify me as an expert in these 5 or 6 things. And then incentivize me to say, hey, if you want to know 10 more things and help other people, here's a pathway to do that. And so by making the pathway visible, by providing recognition, by rewarding them for doing this. So once I accomplish that, what's my reward? Am I going to get a cup of coffee? Am I going to get a free pizza for my team? What am I going to get? And the research is interesting. If you incentivize those folks for team rewards, it's much faster on the adoption rate than individual rewards. So maybe I master all 5 really quickly and I get to choose, if we're in an office, maybe a pizza party for my colleagues, or maybe everybody on my team can go home an hour earlier or something like that. Then I'm incentivized to do that to help my team. Then the team also gets incentivized, like, hey, Karl did that for us because he learned this about the software. Maybe we should do that as well. And so that kind of helps it become more of a team environment and uptake on the adoption. We unfortunately, especially in the United States, very high value on individual competition, when in fact organizations are most successful when they're collaborative. So when you think of the gamification environment, collaborative. So instead of having an individual leaderboard, have a team leaderboard. And instead of having individual, in addition to having individual badges, because I still think you need those, have team badges. Hey, this team has the most people certified. This team has helped the most other teams. And that will help with the adoption of the product and the enterprise-wide application.
Interesting, Carl. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll ask you the final question that I have for you. So, you have mentioned using AI in designing action first experiences. How do you envision AI evolving in instructional design, especially when combined with gaming?
Yeah, I think AI is a great assistant. So I wrote an article way back that AI is your exoskeleton, right? So whatever you can do, so the exoskeleton being on the outside of your body, enhancing your muscles. So whatever we can do as instructional designers, we can do it better with AI. For example, I can come up with, if I have game ideas, like, hey, we're going to gamify this experience, and like, okay, let me brainstorm some gamification ideas. But if I go to AI and I say, hey, give me 10 brainstorm ideas on gamification, boom, I get 10 instantly. Now, 9 of them might be garbage, but one might be one I never thought about before, and I can work with that. So combining my knowledge of gamification and AI's suggestion, I can run with that. And I think instructional designers are going to be the same way. I need a case study around these 4 parameters. Give me 3 case studies. And it can give you 3 case studies and you can say, this case study I think matches. Let me tweak it a little bit and then put that out there. So I really think it's going to be an enhancement to what we're able to do. It's not going to be a replacement, but it will enhance good instructional designers. It will streamline us a little bit. We can create good multiple choice questions. I always say it eliminates the stuff we don't like to do and allows us to focus on the things that we do to do, like action first learning, which is really learning at a deeper level. AI can create, here's a brief sheet or here's whatever, but it can't give you that emotional experience that you go, wow, I get it now. I really understand. There's a game, the MIT beer distribution game, and it teaches bottlenecks. And I used to teach about logistics, and I could teach us blue in the face about bottlenecks and phantom demand and that kind of stuff. But once people played the game, they were like, now I get it. I get what over ordering does and what panic ordering does. I get it. And so you're not going to get that experience from AI.
True. In fact, rightly said, it could be a great supporting agent in your life rather than just, it can't be a replacement to you, because then you have to think which is gonna fit best in this particular scenario. Thanks, Carl. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, this has been an incredible and enlightening conversation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it very much. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for coming to our show. And thanks for sharing your insights, your journey, and your passion for creating impactful learning experience and talking so much about gamification. Your new book, Action First Learning, sounds like a must read for anyone serious about enhancing learning in their organization. To our listeners, thank you for joining us today on the Digital Options Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share this podcast. Until next time, keep innovating, keep learning, and keep growing. Thanks, Carl. Thanks for doing this, and thanks for being on the show.